Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Molten Truth. I'm your host, Zoe Michaels, and hopefully, if you've been with us long enough, I probably don't even have to say my name anymore. But just in case, if you're new to our show, we are here today with a guest from South Dakota. I'm looking forward to getting to know him as well as our audience getting a chance to know you. Scott, and I'm gonna butcher your last name, so I'm gonna let you say it so I don't butcher it this time. What is your last name?
It
Wooster.
is
Okay.
Wooster.
Yeah, because it's spelled only
Yep.
with one
Yep.
O, and I thought, oh, if I say Wooster, I'm gonna mess it up. But if I say Worcester, I'm gonna mess it up. Let's let the man who knows.
Exactly. Been getting that forever. So
It
perfect.
works.
Wooster. Yeah.
So welcome first of all to our show. I'm looking forward to talking to you, and I understand you've got a book out there, and I think when I did my just a curiosity looked you up online, I saw that you're from Irish descent, but there's also some Indian descent mixed in, or
There is. I'm actually Irish and some Bohemian is what I am. But my wife is Lakota. She's from the Rosebud Sioux Reservation in
okay.
South Dakota. So it's Sichangu or burnt thigh Lakota. And uh, and so my grandkids are all Sichangu. They go from my wife at a quarter uh, of Lakota blood to all the way down to my grandkids, who I think are an eighth at this point. But I've also worked with Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota children at St. Joseph's Indian School now for 32 years since I
So
was
you're practically
25
part
years
of the
old.
tribe.
I'm practically part of the tribe. Most of my friends are native here from South Dakota, and the folks I work with day to day, and my family, the people I interact with, are all Native Americans
Nice,
from this
very
area.
nice. Now, have you always lived in South Dakota, or what drew you to that area if you're not originally from there?
Yeah, nope. I'm a South Dakota native. In fact, I'm where I sit right now is in my office in it's small town Chamberlain, South Dakota. It's about 2,300 people. It's a small place. My mom and dad are both from this area, so I'm at in my office at St. Joe's Indian School right now. To the right of me, over here in the west, is the Missouri River, and from here, I can look across the river and almost see where my dad's farm was, where he grew up. They had sold it before I was born, but my mom's farm is to the east of us on this side of the river. And in South Dakota, there's the East River, West River. Who are you? Kind of defines who you are, sort of thing. Well, I'm a little bit from one side of the east and one side of the west, so. Um, this is where I'm from. This is where my roots are, right here in the center of the state. And I grew up in Pierre, which is just up the river about 90 miles. It's the capital of South Dakota, of course. And my mom was a nurse, and my dad, well, they were high school sweethearts here in
Nice.
town, I should say that. Mom and dad were high school sweethearts here. He's a he's been a journalist and columnist in the state since probably 19 late mid 1960s or something like that. Anyway, was raised in Pierre and said I'd never come back to Chamberlain. It's too small. There's no way. I spent time with my grandparents here when I was little, and when I was 25, this job opened up at the school. I have my master's degree in clinical psychology, so ended up finding a job that fit really well, and obviously it fit extremely well because I've been here 32 years here at this point. So South Dakota is my home. Tried a little bit of time away from here, and it didn't
Yeah.
quite fit, and so got back here where the
Nice.
family was.
There's really no replacement for being your family and being someplace where you that's familiar. I used to get so jealous of my friends whose
Absolutely.
families were stable in one area, their whole life. My family
Yeah.
moved like
Yeah.
crazy. People thought I was an army brat. We moved that much, but
Okay. But
but we weren't.
yeah.
It was just that some
Yeah.
people have a restless soul, and apparently my dad was one of them.
Yeah. Yep. which it has its benefits too, to be somebody who's you, you can travel around, you can adapt to a lot of different places. I thought I could. I found myself in Austin, Texas, when I was 24, 25 years old. It's all I wanted. I wanted to be anonymous in a city that had food and camping and music
Austin
and
is
all these
pretty
things that you
amazing.
can
I mean, if
do.
I was going to choose a place, that would
It's
be top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a great place to be, but I found out that it wasn't home. And so this was the place to come back to, and found uh, a couple strange things. I found home here with family and relatives and that sort of thing, but you hit on it earlier, that I found a home here in the culture too, which I did not expect because, as I said, I grew up in Pierre, and we didn't know anything about the history from the indigenous perspective at all. We weren't taught anything. And so when I came to St. Joe's here, basically to work with, I think there's 180 to 200 Native American students that go to school here. And the school has run since 1927. And I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about what I was getting into. I came here because I needed a job and it fit with my degree, right? But what I found was a home among this culture, and people who have been extremely inviting, and that's kind of where my stories come from. So I've written two books recently in the last 5 years. Was never interested in going into kind of the family business. My dad and my uncles are writers and columnists all over the state. They're fairly well known through the newspaper business. Um, and what happened is my wife, who is, I said earlier, she's Rosebud Lakota, and she grew up in Mission, South Dakota, which is on the reservation, had many experiences there. That's her home. That's the home of the tribe that she belongs to, and uh, never learned anything about her culture then in the school. So what happened is I'll throw a little. This is the book I've written. The first book, which is Brave Girl's Story on the Wind, and that's a picture of my wife with her grandmother. And so her grandmother, the the crux of the story is her grandmother grew up in a time around the turn of the century, basically when a lot had gone down in history with the native tribes in the state. Everything was taken away from them. They lost their land, they lost their culture, they lost their language. Um, and so her grandma grew up in this time and had to conform. So at that point, she wasn't in a place where she was teaching her daughter, who is my wife's mother, Bernice. Bernice didn't learn the language. She didn't learn the culture. She was intentionally not taught that so that she would learn to adapt in a different world, because it was really a tough world for their people at that time. And so consequently, my wife's mom, Bernice, wasn't able to teach my wife any of that or any of her siblings. So they grew up on the reservation, but learned not to put on any of the culture, to be a part of any of that. And then they moved away from the reservation when my wife was maybe 6 or 8 for a lot of different reasons, and moved to a farming town here in South Dakota that, again, is about 30 miles down the interstate. And of course, in a small town, Kennebec, South Dakota, they were not teaching any of the culture in that school any more than they were in my school in Pierre. So my wife Lorraine doesn't learn any of this culture that came from her people. And the story's really about it ends up being about 30 years old, isn't passing any of it on to her three daughters. And all of a sudden has some revelations at that age that she wants to grow and learn more about the culture. She accepts a job at St. Joe's Indian School as the cultural teacher. Uh, she just made the right connections to run in and had her teaching degree and ran into that job. And so she ended up coming here and really diving into her culture and teaching it back to the kids. And so for the last 25 years, her absolute passion has been has been giving that back to the kids, to the Lakota kids, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. There's three bands basically, and she teaches language, she teaches culture here, and it's really, the book is a story about Brave. It's called Brave Girl, and the family's name was Brave Boy. So her grandmother was Nellie Brave Boy, mom's name was Bernice Brave Boy, and Lorraine's, that would be her surname. Of course, she took her dad's name, but it's about Brave Girl because she bravely learned the culture and now is trying to keep it alive
That's
with the
amazing.
kids, and does. Yeah, she's amazing. She does a great job with that. And the thing about that book was there are so many writers, writers in my family, and I have an aunt was an English professor at South Dakota State University. My sister was an English professor at South Dakota State. My sister ran the Center for the Book and put on the book festival here in the state. And so I said to them, "Hey, wouldn't it make a lot of sense if one of you wrote this incredibly compelling story about my wife?" And one by one, they all demurred. They said, "This isn't our thing." So in the end, my wife said, "Look, dude, if this book's going to get written, it looks like it's going to have to fall on you to write it." So I did it and found that it was a ton of fun and enjoyed writing it so much that I wrote my own story a little bit later, which I have here. This
Ways
came out
and
about a month
means.
ago. It's called The
Okay.
Ways and Means. And the truth is in front of you. Heaven is where you stand is a line from a song that I wrote. I've been in bands for as long as I can remember, and that's a part of my life too. So I've been writing a lot of songs, original songs, and that type of thing. So that's where this
I
story
love
came from,
that.
and there's a lot to unpack with that too.
Well, I think your family called it right. You know, I sometimes share ideas with people, but at the end of the day, if you have the idea, it's really your story to tell. So I think they called it right. Probably no one else could have done the justice to the story of Brave Girl than you,
There
because
you go.
you lived with your wife. You saw that in action.
Yeah, and I've heard the stories and lived it up close. And I think you're right. I think there's a couple of concepts. I mean, synchronicity or serendipity or any of those kinds of things. Things happen the way they're supposed to happen, and uh, I in this culture, this particular culture, the indigenous culture around here, and this is a reflection of most indigenous cultures in the United States, maybe around the world. Uh, things happen for a reason. They happen the way they're supposed to, and that's I think one of those things with this. And I humbly say that that's not me saying I was called to do this or anything like that. It's just that's the way things shook out, and it's the way they were supposed to. You said it well.
You kind of learn as things go on. But yeah, sometimes it's just those individual thoughts and the way that they like you said, like the way they play out. Um, I'm curious. The backdrop behind you, was that made by family or like something tribal related, or is it just a pretty
It
backdrop?
it's a great question because so I had and a lot of this particular book here is about. I'm gonna come at that in a kind of a circular route, and um, uh, Well, a lot of what this book is about is my journey as I grew up. Some of the mistakes that I made, some of the things I wish I'd been taught, some of the things that I think everybody makes as they grow up, which is part of being tender, part of being young and innocent, and kind of figuring things out as you go along. Well, I've devoted, like I said, 32 years to working primarily with 7th through 12th grade boys from reservations across the state of South Dakota. And so I I want to tell them that don't try to be somebody you're not. You're going to make mistakes. Um, and all the things that a counselor would tell kids, but a lot of it draws from my own experience. And so um, I met a one boy in particular about 15 years or so ago. Name is Sean, and Sean was really into the traditions and the culture. And Sean kind of drugged me down that path. I didn't see this coming. He came to me when he was a seventh grader, and Sean drugged me into the world of ceremonies, and my wife, who it came natural for, because she's Lakota. I'm not. I'm like we said at the top. I'm Irish and Bohemian, so I could never see myself inserting. I never had a reason, first of all, but I couldn't see myself inserting myself into the culture. I just didn't have a reason to do that. But Sean and his grandpa Dino kept coming back and saying that I'll give you one of the biggest teachings that they ever gave me, which is um, they have a concept of a medicine wheel, and you've maybe heard of it, but medicine wheel is a circle. It's a hoop, and it's got the black, the red, the yellow, the white, and it can represent a lot of things. But one thing it represents is all the cultures and the colors of people around the world. And uh, one thing that they both said, and Sean learned this from his grandpa Dino, is that hoop is broken. We've got wars, we've got poverty, we've got just strife and trouble all over the world. The only way that the hoop can be fixed is to bring everybody together to fix it together. So he used partly what Dino used is in kind of the granddaddy of all of the Lakota traditions. There's 7 sacred ceremonies of the Lakota, and the granddaddy of all of them is the sun dance. And I won't get into that too much unless we find a place where we need to come back to that later. But sun dances are run in South Dakota in the different tribes. Some have only native participants. Some allow non-natives to participate. And Dino ran a Sundance that had non-natives, because the idea behind a Sundance, ultimately, you're sacrificing yourself in the heat for 4 days, and then 4 preparatory days, 4 days afterwards. You're dancing, you're fasting, and you're giving to the people, for the people that can't be a part of it, for the sick and suffering in the world, for those that are in nursing homes and prisons, and children who are suffering, all these kinds of things. So the only way to help them is by bringing all the colors in the medicine wheel together. And Dino's very open about that this isn't his place to tell you who can and can't come to it. This comes from a power that's greater than all of us, and who am I to say who can come? Anyway, Sean came to school here as a 7th grader, and Sean was a bridge builder. Sean was into football. Sean played football here at St. Joe's. Sean shook everybody's hand, loved everybody, didn't care who you were. And Sean was as steeped in the traditions as you could possibly be. Sean came to school here, and I was his counselor. And he probably did more counseling for me than I did for him in the end. just in terms, I joke about that all the time. I always called Sean my counselor, but we would talk about ceremonies. We would talk about the Lakota culture, and I learned so much that I wasn't taught when I was a young fella. Anyway, Sean graduated from Chamberlain, and I'm just going to pivot this over to the side a little bit so that you can see. There's me as a coffee barista on the wall, but there's the colors of St. Joe's Indian School are blue and gold, and you can see it's embroidered on the bottom, St. Joseph's Indian School. But Sean gave me that when he graduated from high school here. And so that's something that I have hanging, and that's a special gift from that one student. So this one behind me is actually from Sean's cousin, Kenyon, who also went to school here. And when he graduated 8th grade, he gave me that. It's, maybe you know this, Zoe, already, maybe in our audience, maybe not. But when significant milestones are reached or goals achieved, a lot of times they will, the Native culture will give away a Stark will. So Sean, yeah, it's just an incredible way of giving back, and I can't even express. That's one thing I've learned. They don't have much. They're living on a reservation. They don't have a lot of money. But when it comes time to say thank you in a good way from the heart, these are the kind of gifts that you get. And I can't tell you how much those things mean. And so a big part of this book, the Ways and Means, is about the way Sean changed my life, and about the way Dino, his grandpa, changed my life, the way ceremonies changed my life, and about the growth that happened for me and for others through that. Does that make sense?
The curiosity in me wonders, okay, at what point did they start giving quilts? Was there something that they used to give before quilts, maybe before they were on reservations? Was it maybe buffalo hide? That my mind is wondering that, as far as their history and how that maybe changed, became what it is now.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So my wife would be a great one to answer that question with, teaching the culture. I imagine that you're pretty spot on with that is, there were certain things that came from the land that everything came from, the what I'm seeing, the river, the land, the trees, the animals. And I suspect buffalo hides were a part of that. And just a way of saying the word that they have, let's say I sundanced for 7 total years, but at the end of 4 years, you do a giveaway ceremony to say thank you for being a part of that. And they call it, the word in Lakota is wopila. And wopila means it's just major thank you. And so you would have a giveaway, you'd have a meal, you'd give some of your own things away to people. And it looks different, of course, now than it did 150, 200 years ago. What they were giving.
So they adapt.
Say it again.
We all do, right, to our circumstances. So they adapted, they adjusted.
You adapt to the times. Yeah, exactly. So I've seen all sorts of things given away, sometimes prized possessions, and sometimes just things household items that somebody might need, laundry baskets and some things for the kitchen and those kinds of things. It's more symbolic of what it means. You're giving something away. And I'll say my wife, to cut a little bit to the chase with her, to explain my situation. She was married to another non-native man, and they had 3 daughters who are now my stepdaughters. They were, I want to say 15, 13, and 11 when their dad was having major headaches, excruciating headaches, and they found out very quickly that it was a malignant brain tumor. No, I'm sorry, benign brain tumor. But he had from the trying to think of what you would call it, where you're looking at the tumor. It was in his head. It was the size of a grapefruit, I believe, is how Lorraine tells it. But he, what is it when you're looking for whether how much cancer is
Like
there
an
and how much.
MRI, or are you talking about like how what
Not,
they do medically for that,
it,
or what are we after? Okay, so
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
ultrasound
I'm
or
looking for
MRI,
a
biopsy.
biopsy. Biopsy. Yeah, it's a biopsy. Yes, that one wasn't coming to me. So they did the biopsy on his brain tumor, and the result of that was swelling. And within a week's time, between the time of the headaches and the time they had to take him off life support for that was about a week. And so she's left a widow at 36 years old, and with these young girls. And again, all that's in the story. And I'm just saying, everybody has their own history in their families, their trials, their tribulations, all those kinds of things. But um, so the story kind of tells itself. But uh, he dies, and Lorraine and I knew each other from work because she was the cultural teacher here. I was one of the counselors, and we'd been friends. In fact, I had bought a home from Lorraine and her husband, and as time went on after he passed away, she and I got closer and ended up falling in love and got married, and so had a child of our own, and that kind of leads into a little bit of where I jumped into the culture a little more
Sure,
intensely
you
at
had a
that point.
vested interest more than
Um,
ever.
and so that's a part.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yep. And started going in the sweat lodge with kids out here at the school. I hadn't done any of those kinds of things before, and so that brought about some of my transformation too into where I was headed.
So where we left off,
Yeah,
you had married your wife. She had children from the first husband who had that tumor. You had a daughter then with your wife, and then that drew you more into the culture. So that's where we left off.
she was born in 2008, and I was kind of a reluctant father. I always said I was single for a long time, um, and uh, just couldn't make sense of bringing a child into the world. It's a tricky place to live, right? And I've worked with kids out here at the school a lot, but I just uh, couldn't quite picture myself having my own, bringing my own into the world. But when you fall in love, things happen, and all of a sudden you've got three bonus daughters, or however you want to look at that. So I started raising three teenagers with Lorraine right off the bat, and they were very accepting. But Lorraine said, "Geez, I think we should probably have one of our own." And Lorraine's pretty persuasive, so so we ended up having our own, and her name is Sage, and Sage is in the cultural is medicine, and so it was kind of a healing name we chose for her, for all of us. One interesting thing that in the both books touch on this a little bit, is two of Lorraine's girls with Travis, who is their father. They uh, got type 1 diabetes when they were 4 and 3 years old, and so they were very young. They had a double whammy, and got it at a time where the treatments were a little
Primitive works.
primitive isn't the right word, but I mean just a little more basic in the way you had to. Yeah, yep. And so you know, you very quickly, Lorraine and her husband learned you have to do something with insulin and food every single day, every single meal in order to keep your child alive. And when I came on the scene, it looked simple because they had it down. Lorraine knew it. She was basically a diabetic educator because she'd been around it. The two girls knew what they were doing. They could give themselves shots, they could test themselves, check their own blood. And I basically got to stand on the sidelines and just watch how easy they made it look. Well, their dad also had adult onset type 1, so he was dealing with it with them. So you would assume that he's the carrier of type 1. Something in his genetic makeup led to the two girls having it. Lorraine didn't have a history in her family. Well, when we had Sage at 16 months took a negative direction. She was having more trouble with bedwetting. She was having trouble with being thirsty all the time. And Lorraine scratched her head a little bit and said, "I've seen these signs before. I don't like the way this is shaken out." And I said, "It's probably nothing. I can't imagine that it means anything." I a little bit oblivious, right? But we came back from a camping trip when she was 16 months old and tested her.
Dangerous.
And I think her blood was 300, her blood sugar. And immediately Lorraine and the girls began to sob. And I still was in denial a little bit. Hey, maybe it's a fluke. There's no carriers now. It was their dad that was the carrier. And by noon that day, I think we were at the hospital being diagnosed and then being shipped off to the nearest medical center, which is in Sioux Falls, a couple hours away, and the children's castle there, spending the night. And I was learning how to give a 16-month-old girl shots. And you do it or, your kid doesn't make it. It's that simple. You have to learn to get a little tough with that pretty quickly. So it's a strange family history that you've got two different dads and you've got three girls that have diabetes. I'll cut to the long view of this, which is that one of my diabetic stepdaughters gave birth to one of my granddaughters, Cedar, another medicine, of course, about 5 years ago. And Cedar was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes about a year ago. And you just think, wow, how in the world can, you just have that? It's just, and again, tears. Frankie is the daughter we have that gave birth to Cedar. And it's a lot for a family to handle. And people say, well, you guys are well equipped for that. You've got the know-how, you've got the diabetic education, all that kind of stuff.
Doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah, but it's still incredibly hard. And when you have a child that age, they've all been diagnosed relatively young. They don't understand it. I mean, Sage was 16 months. She didn't have a clue what that meant. She's never known anything different. And she's 18 now. And she'll graduate here in 3 weeks, and then she's going to go on to college from there. And she's got a good grasp on this. They all have pumps now, insulin pumps, and they can all, even down to the 5-year-old. Cedar now has an insulin pump that she can do on her own with some guidance. I mean, you still have to tell her at that age how many carbs she's had, how much bolus she needs to dial in for all that. So it's been a trick, a challenge for sure. And that brings me kind of a little bit full circle around back to the ceremonies, because when we first met Sean and Dino and Lorraine said Sean said, you should come down to my grandpa's Sundance. We did when Sage was about 4 years old. And when we got to that Sundance, it was all foreign to me. I'd never been to one before. and it's like it's stepping into another world. Lorraine had been a couple of times, so she had a little bit of an idea of what she was getting into. Um, but that whole day that we were there, bouncing off people in on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota at this small camp, we ran into a lot of folks that I maybe knew through the school or had met in other places. And we talked to them a little bit about Sage having diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and the response was always the same. There are healing ceremonies that that the indigenous people have always had in order to bring health back to those who are suffering. And if you ask for it in a good way, you could you could be a part of that. And they said it with in such incredible conviction. Um, and I wasn't there was no I wasn't convinced because here I'm not that I don't believe in it. I believe that miracles can happen. I was raised Catholic and I've been around I was exposed to miracles of Jesus Christ as growing up or to a God. And I know this isn't all a lot of spiritual um, iterations around the globe. And I definitely know that it's from this culture here, but I had no idea where I myself or my daughter stood in relation to that. You go, well, that's for somebody else that fixed, somebody else may get healing from that. I believe in it wholeheartedly. I have no issue with that. Who am I to say that those things can't happen? But why would they happen to me? And what's my right to be a part of that? Um, so, but they talked a lot about it, um, and one thing led to another, and we found ourselves in the midst of that. Sean found medicine that appeared to him. I can't explain it any farther than that, and it wouldn't be my place to do it. I write about that much in this book here that piece happened. Uh, we were invited to the ceremonies, and in the end, Lorraine and I just kind of stepped out, went out on a limb, and said, "Yeah, I think this would be something that we'd like to do. Have it be a part of a healing ceremony for Sage." And what I you can't say that kind of thing without being willing to jump in with both feet, in the deep end, because there's a lot that can come along with that. And we neither one of us went in with our eyes closed. We knew that there was a lot that went into asking for the ceremony, but it led to us ultimately being a part of the ceremonies, of being sun dancers, of being a part of what was happening with Dino and his Sundance. And uh, in any other circumstance, this Irish Bohemian guy that descended from a couple of farmers on either side of the river here in South Dakota would have said, "Nah, that's not something. That's not a place where I see myself, where I would find myself." And because of what we talked about earlier, this concept of wachwala is the word, or serendipity, where things happen as they're supposed to. You find yourself right in the midst of something like that, asking for something, and then being willing to give back for it. And in the end, cut to the chase a little bit in the book, you find that the Sundance is about asking for help for everybody and about putting something in and getting something back that isn't necessarily a miracle or something tangible. It's about getting something that's bigger than all of us, and so it's my passion. That's something I'm very excited about, and something I like sharing with the kids. Not dogma of any of it, just the idea of there's so much there that we can get if we work for it, we really believe in it, and all those kinds of things. there you have it. There's a long way of
Sure. And
explaining
does your
Sundance
second book go
101
more
in a
into
quick
that and
version.
that experience and more details?
It, it goes, yeah. What it does is goes into basically my um, the first book touched on it because Lorraine was part of that, but I of course can't speak for her experience with all of that. I could just kind of narrate objectively what we were going through. Second book was more of my insights and what I was coming to in all of that, and what led to it. As a young guy that was raised in a way, um, really. I'll go back a little bit. My dad was an alcoholic when I was growing up for 10 years. I didn't know it. He was a functioning journalist, columnist, functioning dad. Really was and has always been a great guy. Um, but drank every day, all day, hard liquor, and it was a problem for the lady that he lived with. For my mom, it just was tricky because she was well aware of the drinking and what that was doing to the family. I was blissfully unaware. My sister and I basically lived a pretty good life. We had everything we needed, and so we got along pretty well. But at about 10 years old, my dad knew he needed help, and my mom was pushing him in that direction too, maybe with some ultimatums and that type of thing. But he drove onto the lawn in Pierce, South Dakota, of a treatment center, and in his pickup, got out,
Wow.
left the car running, walked in, said, "I need help," and passed out at the counter, which
Yes.
is which is an incredible story. And I feel like every time I say it, or that when I wrote it in the book, I felt, well, I'm obviously embellishing this, but I wasn't. I was not embellishing it. And what it led to is he woke up the next morning, went to a young or a alcohol and drug counselor came into his room, woke him up, gave him a cup of coffee, and said, "Hey Terry, I'm Mal, and we're going to see if we can't get you off of alcohol." And Dad said, "I don't think I want anything to do with this. I'm gonna leave." And Mal said, "Well, let's just have a cup of coffee and talk about it." And 30 days later, he came out sober, and has been for 45 years, I suppose, maybe 50 now. But if you ask my dad how long he's been sober, he would say a day,
Maybe
one
that's
day
the
at a
secret
time.
of his
He'll say, "I've been
success.
sober today," and that's where he's been. So I that's the secret of his success. And I think in AA, that is this, which he still is a part of. And, I mean, I don't know if he goes to the club and is a part of that anymore, but I know that's the foundation of what got him well, and got him healthy again. So when I was 10 and my sister was 11, uh, mom and dad made it. Their dad was in recovery, mom was in Al-Anon, and my sister Jennifer and I were in Alateen. And so we were going to meetings, and we were going to River Park, that's the treatment center, functions, and we were learning that it's not okay to drink. And so my everything we were taught is, you don't need that. It's not something that serves you at all. You can have fun without drinking. All these important lessons that my dad and mom were going through on their own, and they were trying to impart to us. And so I had promised, made that pledge. Well, I'm never going to drink, and I meant it. I knew what sobriety meant, and sure enough, that lasted until I was probably 16 years old, and peer pressure just got the best of me. I mean, everybody was having way too much fun, and I certainly couldn't be left out of that. And so uh, one night, and you're off to the races, and you don't look back. But the challenge was with that was, I think I knew pretty early on in drinking and binge drinking, a lot of people do in high school and a lot of people do in college, that something just wasn't right with it. It went against my plan for life. It went against my morals and values, my behavior when I was drinking. And so all of that led to quite a bit of a crisis of conscience. And also, uh, and I write about this a lot in the book too, there's a healthy dose of, no, I should say an unhealthy dose of social anxiety, which I picked up around the time I was 17, 16, 17, probably about the time I started drinking. It was unhealthy and it was irrational, which anxiety is. It's an irrational thing. And of course, as a guy going to school to study psychology, that could have been why I ended up in that field. May not have been, but you learn so much about it. And I couldn't speak in front of people. What you and I are doing, Zoe, right now, I couldn't have done this in a million years. I would have had a panic attack, and you would have lost me the first 30 seconds in, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Would have wanted to. I really would have wanted to, but I couldn't have done it. I couldn't ask a girl out when I was sober. I couldn't give a presentation when I was sober. I couldn't, all these kinds of things. And I'm not minimizing that at all. It was very serious. There was a lot of faking that went on, and I wasn't a strange person. I wasn't some kind of a social somebody that I had many friends. I had a lot of female friends. I was getting my degree. I was normal when I talked to people. They wouldn't think this guy's unusual, but it was in the meantime eating me up inside, anticipatory social anxiety about, oh my gosh, I have a presentation in grad school coming up in 3 weeks. How do I get out of it? How do I get into it and not have a panic attack? And so you've got 3 weeks of anticipatory anxiety leading up to it that just was plain old not fun. It led into my work life. And, even in meetings as a professional at 30, 35 years old, it still was eating me up. Now I can say that I step back. I quit drinking when I was 24, I think it was. So it's been 35 years, a day at a time for me. Has it been that long? 30, somewhere in there, 30, been almost since the day I started working with kids here and wanted to be able to look them in the eye and say, nope, I'm sober and I'm living the life that I want to live, and it sure is wonderful. And so, yeah, sobriety's been about 32 years for me. A life without social anxiety took a little bit longer. Some of it, when Lorraine came along, she's an extrovert. She she's never felt anxiety. She's almost the exact opposite of me in that way. So when it came to, hey, we're going to date, hey, we're going to get married, hey, we're going to have a kid, it was a little bit of Lorraine nudging me along and bringing me along with some of those things. And thank God she did, because here we are at this point. But at some point, the social anxiety just began to fade away. And whether it led to, putting myself out there with 2 books or playing in a band and being the only person that would sing the songs, or having my own podcast here on campus, where you are putting yourself out there all the time, it doesn't bother me even in the slightest. And I assume you have some of that same thing, and I might be wrong, but where if you do it enough, you just don't think too much about what it is. You trust your story enough, you trust what you're going to say enough, that whether I say the right things and do things successfully, or whether I fall on my face, it really, in some ways, is all the same to me. I've accepted that what's going to come comes, and maybe it's sort of a yin yang thing. Maybe it's the balance of it that I'm totally
I
comfortable
do
with
get
at this
it.
point.
I
Does
was
that resonate at
painfully
all
shy
with
as a
you?
young person. It took me many, many years to grow past that, and many experiences to grow past
Hmm.
that. But
Yep.
I still remember when I started this podcast. I
Yeah.
started it, it'll be a year this June.
Yep.
And I was so nervous that I decided that I was going to pre interview my guests.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I did. I had like two sessions. I had one session where I had a conversation and took notes
Yeah.
because I
Yep.
wanted to be able to speak intelligently when I was on my podcast. And then after about 3 months, I
Yeah.
got comfortable enough that I'm like, we're going to wing it. But I had to,
Absolutely.
I've never been a person to dive into water, to just jump in. I've
Yeah.
always been a
Yeah.
let me wade slowly in. And that is my personality. Mm.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. Dip the toes in. Yep. So isn't it kind of amazing, to be drawn to this almost as almost as a polar opposite of what a personality may have been. I don't know. I can't explain that. I'll do it. I'll do any publicity now, which is half of the fun of it. Where I don't care. You have to trust your story and trust yourself a little bit in order to do those things, and really just kind of go with it, is what I found. But I couldn't have told my 20
I get it.
something self that in a million years. I would have said, sure, I get it, but hey, if you've ever had a full blown panic attack where you can't talk through your heartbeats and you can't catch your breath, it's and you're shaking, it's pretty darn embarrassing to have that experience in front of other people. By and large, people are are pretty good about watching and pretending that it's not happening, and I've always been thankful for them, but for doing that. But if you're the one experiencing it, you're painfully aware of it when it's happening. And so I guess to take that a step further with the kids, the boys that I work with, I want to tell them that life is really really tricky. There are some things that are going to be uncomfortable to navigate, and that's all part of it. And I guess I wish I had heard that a little more when I was a kid. That what you're feeling is okay. It's perfectly normal. My parents were great; they would have understood that. But you don't. As a young man, I wasn't running around telling anybody that I was a wreck inside. I just you don't you walk around with your head up and pretend that that doesn't exist. So when my book came out, I know my mom had said to me, I never had any clue that it was that severe. Well, that's not a knock on her as a mother for not picking up on cues or anything like that. There were no cues. I wasn't putting the cues out there for that. But if there's any way I can get any of my boys at 12 years old or 16 or 18 to understand that the only way people are going to understand what's going on with you is if you're willing to put yourself out there. So I never force a kid in this office where I'm sitting. I do a lot of one-on-one counseling with kids and group counseling, but I will tell them, I'm not going to force you to talk about anything you don't want to talk about ever. If there's trauma, that's yours to share as you want to share it. But what I can tell you is that trusting someone and having that relationship and feeling open enough to talking about that is going to make you better. It's going to make you whole. It's going to help you grow. It's going to help you get through those really tricky times. And if I can be that person to just engage them and help them understand that's part of life, is navigating all that in that way, and be that person that they can build a relationship with, then then I've done something, I guess. And I don't look at it in terms of it's not trophies for myself. It's built on relationship. I didn't understand that at 25 when I came into this business. I didn't know the culture, and I have kids for 32 years. I have kids of kids for 32 years. I'm working generations, of course, now, and probably maybe even grandkids for all I know. I can't come up with any off the top of my head, but the game has really stayed the same. It's about building relationship without forcing relationship. And what I found out is that uh, most of the kids and their families, if you're doing things right, they will do anything for you. They're as loyal to me as anybody's ever been in my life, and and they were loyal to my family, to the people that I love, and it works reciprocally. So for them, I would do anything for them. They're my family at this point. And they're not blood, obviously, but it's something that's as strong. And I do anything for their families. You know, I've got, yeah. There's that bond, and that's been the revelatory part of it for me over the course of 32 years. Is that wow? Again, it's the same thing I said about Sundance. It's you jump into the experience, and it becomes so much bigger than anything you would have possibly imagined. And here we are today. And I guess the books are my stab at writing about it and trying to explain it. In and You know, I come from a writing family, but I've also worked in a storyteller's culture for the last 32 years. You know, if you look back, you've got this culture that told stories. It was all oral. They weren't writing their history down, and that's part of the reason that it's not learned. The other reason that it's not learned or hasn't been for a long time is far more sinister than that, because it was taken. But they just weren't writing that culture down, and so you learn to be a pretty good storyteller. Being a part of this culture, and just the kids are storytellers, the families are storytellers, um, and that's what we do. And the other thing is, when you're 25 and somebody says, go entertain seventh graders in a classroom, keep them locked in, keep them riveted to information about self growth and emotions and thoughts. You realize quickly when you've lost a room full of 13-year-olds. And so I learned very
Yes.
quickly that you have to be able to
And I
spin a
don't
good
think that's
yarn
limited to
in
that
order to
age
keep them
either.
them
You know, some of
engaged.
the most boring books are the
And
technical
if you're
books,
not
right? But you put it into a story, something that people
correct,
can
yeah,
relate to, then they're going to retain that information.
yeah,
I think that's just simple human
yes,
nature, maybe amplified by youth.
you're yeah, 100%. There's a way to lose an audience. There really is. And you can see, you can, if you're observant, you can watch the lights dim for your audience, and you can tell when they're lit up by what you're bringing to them. Usually for me, it takes a good story that most of the
Those are
time I
the
haven't
best.
thought of before it starts coming out of my mouth. Right, which is great. And it yeah, it taught me how to do that type of thing, and to feel comfortable with it. And maybe that's where some of that comfortability comes from. And it's exciting. I play the music that my bands have always played is is improvisatory. So you've got, whether it's jam bands or jazz bands or whatever, you learn to improvise on the fly. And I was not trained to do that. I never had music instructors that trained me to do that. But again, you jump in with both feet, and that's what you get comfortable with. And almost for me, I have to have that in my life. And so a way to improvise and riff. And I don't really don't have many areas of my life where I don't see it as that
So
blank
as
slate to be
we
able
get
to do
ready to
those
close
kinds of
out,
things.
because we're getting toward the end of the program, there's a couple things I really want to highlight. So first of all, where can people find your books? Where would they go if they wanted to purchase one of your books?
Okay. I think pretty much anywhere. The first book, Brave Girl. So Brave Girl was put out by Book Baby. I'm basically you. If you do an internet search, you can find it just about anywhere for order on the internet. There's a few bookstores around South Dakota where you could find it, but for most of our audience, it will be found on the internet. You just type in Brave Girl Story on the Wind, and that's where that'll be. Second book was put out by Amazon, uh, uh, Amazon Kindle, I think it's called. But anyway, same thing. You type that in, and it's easy to find on there. They're both done in ebook, regular book, and
Do you have a website?
yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah. Social
I
media?
don't have a website, but I need to get
Can
one.
we find you on
I
Facebook or
do not have a
Instagram?
website. Facebook's Scott Wooster. Instagram, Scott Wooster. Definitely can be reached there. I'd love to hear from people if they want to communicate or be pointed in a
Excellent.
direction
Well,
of the
I have
book or
appreciated
culture
speaking with
or
you. I'm
any of
sorry
that
for
good
the
stuff.
technical
Anything we talk.
difficulties, but I'm sure we'll still have a beautiful show once I do some editing. So, thank you to you, Scott, and to our audience for sticking it out with us as we got through our interview today. I'm sorry
Awesome.
we didn't get to do our extra little bonus question, but with Riverside behaving
Hmm.
so badly today, I just don't even want to risk messing that up. So, thank you so much. And thank you. Check us out for the next episode next week. Thank you.